Well, hello, my friend. My name is Joe Bakhmutsky. I'm the founder of Power to Be Happy and also the author of Finding Hope in Times of Uncertainty, a guide to thriving in a challenging world of today. And right now, today, we're talking about one of my favorite topics, which is how do you take back control? And the real key to that is knowing the difference between what you can and cannot control. And one thing that I would like you to think about is the fact that the boundary, like that difference between what you can and what you cannot control, is decided by you. That might come off a little weird, but I will say it again. That the difference between what you can and what you cannot control is a decision that is explicitly made by you. And that is very important to acknowledge, because we often feel like we're at the mercy of all of these powers out there. There's all of these things that like are beyond our control, that seem huge, that seem scary, and in many ways that they are. When we think about things like, the economy, when we think about things like the pandemic, when we think about things like politics, when we think about things that people do or things that people say, sometimes that all seems like it is absolutely beyond anything that we can influence or control. But I invite you to think of that as the way we want to really look at it is we want to look at something. And I want you to right now do it with me. I would invite you to think of something that seems to you in your life that it appears to be beyond your control. Something that, like I said, something that might be to do with other people, something that might be to do with something that might be frustrating you, might be troubling you, might be worrying you, might be making your life difficult. That's probably when we typically come across things that kind of seem beyond our control. I would like you to think of something like that. Just pick it up and let's think about that a little bit. And what I would invite you to do, if let's say I know that for me, the example that I want to go with you today is the pandemic, right? That's something that really is it's big and it's scary. But when you take something, whether that's whether that's what your daughter-in-law said to you last week, or whether that's what the neighbors are doing, it seems like it's or whether that's economy or whatever that is, when that thing, whatever you the example that you had, in my case it was the pandemic. I want you to look at that, but then look at a subset of what is it that you can claim within that or related to it that you can control. Right? So we look at the big thing, but we want to really take a bite out of it. Right? Well, imagine like you could take a bite out of it, and what would be something that you can within that influence or control? So let's say I take the pandemic. It's scary because it's really taking over the world. There's restrictions, there's the virus, but I'm thinking like always I'm going back, well, what is it that I can realistically take off? What is it that I can kind of claim for myself within the pandemic? Well, I know it's what I can control is the interactions we have with family, friends, people around us. I can limit the amount of hours I spend at work because I have some influence over that. I'm lucky enough to be in a position where I can spend most of the time, working from home. It's what I'm doing. I can get vaccinated. I can get, I can avoid traveling. I can avoid kind of risks that I feel would or at least minimize the risk that I would feel would make me and my family feel more safe. So it's only I can change what we're doing within the context of this bigger thing that is big and scary, and a lot of the aspects of the pandemic are outside of my control. But what I do and what we do as a family and how I think about it and all of the interactions and how we work within that bigger context is what matters. And that is something that I can, if not always control completely, then I can at least influence in some way. And that's what I would like to invite you to do with things in your life. And that is especially also true when we look at those items, those situations one by one. Because oftentimes when you look at life, especially, if you're here, right? So you know what it's like to go through the struggle. And it often feels like this, it's no matter where you look in your life, there's things that just seem to be beyond your control. And it kind of becomes overwhelming like that. And that's why it's so vital to kind of set these things apart. Whether that's your situation at work, whether that's something that happens in the economy, whether that's something that happens with your partner, whether that's something that happens, with health, right? It's really important to set them apart and then kind of decide in each situation what is going to be, even if it seems completely outside of your control, what is it that you can kind of bite off? What is going to be kind of that something that you can claim for yourself, something that can be yours, that you can that can be yours, that you can at least influence in some way. And it's only going to be one part of something that is bigger, but it's going to be your part. It's going to be part that you can shape to a certain extent, that you can influence and control. And that is also the shift that we can make in our minds. And because control often assumes having complete control, having kind of complete power over something. But what is, I guess, a more helpful way to look at it is to transition from control to influence. Because influence is something that assumes that we can change things, we can tweak things, but it doesn't have that absolute kind of certainty to it. And what ends up happening is when we look at what we can influence in those bigger situations, and we look at only a subset of it, when we look at one part of it that we could kind of influence in some way, well, what we can really influence is often something that is very personal. We can influence our thoughts, we can influence our feelings, and we can influence our own actions. And that is true to any of the bigger situations that we're kind of looking at in this context, because that's where we can go. And I really believe that influence is it really influences positive change. There's some, because in our society, we've looked at influence as something that is almost negative, right? As if you're making someone do things. But I really look at influence, whether that's in relation to somebody else, or but mostly influence in our own lives, is always from the perspective of positive change. That influence is positive change, where you either help, or you guide, or you support, whether that's others, someone that you care about, whether that's your partner, whether that's your child, whether that's your workmate, whether it's someone in your community, or you help, or guide, or support yourself. Because we're always going to be self-reliant to a certain extent, aren't we? In this challenging world that we live in today, that is full of uncertainty, sometimes we can't always rely on our friends or family, because they might themselves be going through a difficult time. So the first person that we can always look up to and support and guide and be there for is ourselves. We can influence our own thoughts. We can influence our emotions. We can influence what we do. And not from a kind of perspective of blame or pointing fingers or being harsh on yourself, but from a perspective of going, well, is it helpful that I feel this way? This thought, it's okay that it comes up for me. Maybe it's a worry, maybe it's a concern, maybe it makes me feel scared, but it doesn't have to be true. And I can look at this thought, I can examine it, or this feeling that comes up for me, and I can let it go. I can let it pass, and I can act in my life, and I can do things that are more in line with my values, that I've been given myself a chance to think through it and to act. And even if I can't change everything, then I can at least influence it in some way. Remember what we talked about? We talked about this maybe big situation, or this, it's something that seems really bigger than it is, and it may well be. But we only want to kind of take and deal with one part of it, one that is close to home, one that is related to you. We're not trying to change it all, but we're only trying to change one part of it. We can only try to influence one part of it that has to do with yourself. And what's interesting is when you look at situations in your life, from the perspective of what you can influence or change, and when you look at only one part of it, once something that really interesting that happens is that you start to feel, because you kind of start to question it, a little bit more, and you start to feel that there is the boundaries of that can be expanded. So when you, let's say with the pandemic, maybe what you started with was this thing, but then when I looked at it a few weeks later, I can go, well, what, I can influence a little bit more. I don't have to feel that I have to justify myself to kind of maybe friends who about my personal emotions or perspective. I can just kind of politely let them know, right? And I'm okay to deal with that. I'm okay to let it happen. I don't have to prove anything. I don't have to make anyone feel wrong. But if this is what I feel is right for me, if this is what I feel is right for our family, then I can totally go with that unapologetically. And that is something that I can influence. And in each situation in our lives that may seem beyond our control, we can expand that sphere of influence, sometimes little bit by bit by bit. When you can apply your own kind of creative expression, when you can, think about it in a way that really helps you, that really helps you feel more in control. It helps you feel more in charge. Because all of a sudden, you're not looking at this big thing, you're not trying to change the world, but you're trying to change your world and to influence it in a way that helps you with your words, with your actions, with your thoughts, and with your feelings. And I really think about it as almost when you're looking to expand that what you can potentially influence, it's not even like it's not like you're going out to conquer, or like it's not some big step that you got to be able to take. I think it's almost like you have to lean into it. When I remember when I was in Europe, before European Union was in place, I remember I was in this place where I believe it was in Aachen, in Germany, and it was this particular one spot that was just outside of town, which was where 3 countries converged. Right, it was Netherlands, Belgium, and Germany. And it was really weird. There was this kind of sign in there, and you could almost step from one place into another. And it was really bizarre because I kind of grew up in Soviet Union where, you couldn't really go anywhere. And this idea that you could just be in it in different countries just seemed like completely mind-blowing to me. And so that was an experience. I mean, it might sound so basic to you, or just non-essential, but seemed, it was really kind of, it was really groundbreaking for me. Just the idea that I could kind of almost lean into a different country. And that just blew my mind at the time. And that's how I really think about, expanding what you can influence or have that sense of control over. It's almost kind of going, what can I lean into today? Whether that's with someone in your life, whether that's with your partner, whether that's with your child, whether that's with your best friend, whether that's with your workmate. You cannot control directly what they do, or whether that's a bigger situation, whether that's, for example, to do with, what's happening in your workplace, or whether that's what's happening, in the society. We can also try to affect how do we lean into what we can potentially do in terms of, having that positive change, that influence. That influence comes from doing something that is helping someone, or is guiding someone, or is just supporting someone. Whether that's someone who you want to influence in a positive way, but also influencing yourself. Because when you start to be more kind to yourself, when you start to feel like you are in some way, supporting yourself or guiding yourself and saying to yourself, it's okay. And talking to yourself like a friend, that also makes you feel like you're more in control. You're more in control of your feelings. You're more in control of your thoughts. You're more in control of what you do because you're purposefully and consciously directing them to a place where it's more helpful. And that's, is what brings us back to where we started. That what you can and cannot control is ultimately decided by you. So I would challenge you, my friend, to think of life in those terms. You make the decisions. And even if it's a situation that seems too big, look at one part of it that you could influence or change at least in some way. Whether that's how you look at it, whether that's how you feel, whether that's what you do about it. Right? Because these are the things that is up to us. And when you start doing it like that, your sphere of influence grows. Because that's what ultimately influence is all about. Creating that positive change that's going to help or support someone that you care about or yourself. My name is Joe Bakhmutsky. Hope this was helpful to you. Thanks so much for being here. And as always, I'll see you soon. Ciao.